G'day guys, welcome to this video series where we're going to break down everything that you need to know to master each and every detachment in the Chaos Space Marine Codex. We're going to break down the detachment rules in detail, go through what they do, and give each one a rating of 0 to 10. We're going to break down every enhancement available to each detachment. We're going to talk about which ones are worth the points, which ones you're going to want to leave behind, and we're going to give each of them a rating of 0 to 3. We're then going to break down all of the stratagems, some of the amazing power, which ones are worth the command points and which ones are not, and we're going to give each one of those stratagems a rating of 0 to 3 as well. We're then going to talk about which data sheets pair best with the stratagems, enhancements, and detachment abilities to create some truly brutal combos on the tabletop, and we're going to give them a further rating of 0 to 10. Once that's done, we're going to have an overall power rating for the detachment of 0 to 50 based on the above points. This is going to give you a real indication of how powerful this detachment is. Then we're going to include an example list that includes all of the powerful combos that we've talked about earlier. We're going to give some practical examples of how to deploy that list and how to engage with the terrain and your opponent in various mission formats. And finally, we're going to place that detachment on the detachment leaderboard. We're going to give it a tier rating and we're going to place it in contrast to the other detachments to help you decide which detachment you want to field when you're running your Chaos Space Marines. So with that being said, let's get stuck into the video.
Look for the Blood God.
Alrighty guys, today we're talking about the Soulforged Warpack. This is your Vashdor, your Demon Engine Heavy, your somewhat Iron Warriors-y kind of detachment that's going to be focused around doing heavy damage to your opponent. So this is a really, really interesting detachment. But let's dig into, first, the detachment rules, because they are often one of the things that defines a faction. So the detachment rule for this is called Debt to the Soulforged. Each time a Heretic Astartes Demon Vehicle unit from your army makes a Dark Pact, it can evoke its contract. If it does, subtract 1 from the resulting leadership test when making the Dark Pact, and until the end of the phase, each time a model in that unit makes a range attack, add +1 to the wound roll, and add 2 to the tax characteristic of melee weapons equipped with models in that unit. Alright, so this one is probably one of the best detachment rules that we have available to us. I'm going to give this a 7 out of 10. Being able to increase the attacks characteristic on your big scary things like Mauler Fiends is wild, because they have such powerful attacks. And being able to increase the wound rolls on your things like Forge Fiends when they're strength 10 means that they're going to be wounding most things in the game on 2s or even 3s. Really, really powerful. And it really does dial the damage output of this army up to obscene levels, to the point where your opponent is going to be terrified to face you. Their downside is, of course, you're going to be taking some damage, some additional damage potentially from your Dark Pacts, because you're going to be more likely to fail them. However, I think it's a very good trade in order for that additional damage that you're going to be able to put down the range. But with that being said, let's have a look at the enhancements, because it's more than just a powerful detachment rule you need. You also need good enhancements and good stratagems. So let's look at those. First one we have is Invigorated Mecha Tendrils. So that's 15 points. This one is add 4 inches to the bearer's move characteristic, and it's for Warp Smiths only. So this one, not particularly good. Your Warp Smith, yes, it allows him to keep up with things like your Mauler Fiends and whatever, but if you're sending a Warp Smith along with your Mauler Fiends, he's very likely to get attacked, because people are going to be able to get within range to get past his lone up, or they're going to be able to charge him and kill him. So realistically, you probably don't want your Mauler Fiend running along with these things. Your Warp Smith running along with your Mauler Fiends. You probably want to send your Mauler Fiends out on their own and let them do their own work, and keep your your Warp Smith back with your Daka, in which case additional movement's not a huge deal. So I'm going to give this a 1 out of 3. Next we have Attempting Addendum. So this is 25 points, Heretic Astartes model only. Each time a Heretic Astartes Demon Vehicle unit from your army evokes its contract, whilst within 3 inches of the bearer, if it suffers 1 or more mortal wounds as a result of that Dark Pact, add 1 to the number of mortal wounds that it suffers. And until the end of the phase, each time a model in that unit makes an attack, you can re-roll the hit roll. So getting re-roll hits is crazy, and it's a 6-inch, essentially a 3-inch aura. So, 6-inch wide sort of, aura that you're going to be able to get re-roll hits. Very, very powerful when you're talking about being able to put these big, high damage output units, and you're really dialing that damage up to the next level. So I'm going to give this one a 3 out of 3. This is really, really cool. I think it's almost an auto-include in these lists. Next, we've got the Forger's Blessing, 20 points. Heretic Studies model only. In your command phase, select one friendly Heretic Studies vehicle unit within 12 inches of the bearer, and until the start of your command phase, that unit has a Feel No Pain 6+ ability. So, Feel No Pain is very, very good, but there's some few caveats around here. It needs to be a Heretic Studies vehicle, it needs to be within 12 inches of the bearer, and it is only from the command phase to command phase, so it's pretty good. But it's not exactly game breaking. It's only a 6-up Feel No Pain, and it's got some restrictions around it. I'm going to give this a 2 out of 3 because it's sort of your middle of the road style stratagem. That was Forger's Blessing. Next we have Soul Harvester. Heretic Studies model from your army. While the bearer is on the battlefield, each time an enemy unit within 12 inches of the bearer is destroyed, on a d6 roll of a 5+, you gain 1 CP. So anything that's going to get you to gain CP is very, very good. Especially given some of the stratagems, which we'll go through in a moment, that are really, really powerful. So being able to regenerate command points is fantastic. There is the challenge of the unit has to die within 12 inches of the bearer. So depending on who you give this to, it may be more or less powerful. Being able to give this to something like a Demon Prince that's going in and doing the killing himself is good, because he's going to kill something and then you're going to be able to do the roll. However, the downside is, if you're sending him in, he's very likely to die in response the next turn. So you may only get 1 or 2 opportunities to use this. And then the flip side to that is, if you give it to something like a Warpsmith that's sitting back in your castle, back with your range things, that Warpsmith's going to survive the entire game. But most of the things that die probably aren't within 12 inches of your Warpsmith. So it's going to be a tricky one to sort of use. And with that being said, I'm going to give it a 2 out of 3. Regenerating command points is fantastic. I'm just not sure if this is the best way to go about doing that. Alright, now let's have a look at the stratagems. So there's pretty wild stratagems in here, so let's get stuck into it. We've got Desperate Pledge for 1 CP. In your shooting phase or fight phase, one Heretic Studies Demon Vehicle unit from your army that has not been selected to shoot or fight yet this phase. Until the end of the phase, if your unit evokes its contract, each time it makes an attack, improve the armor penetration characteristic of the attack by 1. So this is fantastic, particularly on your smaller things like your Venom Crawlers, where you're basically going to be able to go, cool, I'm going to dial those attacks up to be even higher AP. Things like your Forge Fiend, it's already relatively high AP, and your Mauler Fiend's combat is not that bad, but being able to do that on things like your Venom Crawlers is really good. It's also really good if your opponent has things like Armor of Contempt, and you know that they're going to use that in response. You can go, cool, well, you've used your Armor of Contempt, so I'm going to use my Desperate Pledge, and basically I'm going to zero out your stratagem. So this one's really, really cool. I'm going to give this a 3 out of 3, because being able to get that additional AP is fantastic. Next up, we have the Glut of Souls. So 1 CP, used in your fight phase, 1 Heretic Studies Demon Vehicle from your army, excluding Titanic units. That unit has not been selected to fight this phase. Until the end of the phase, if your unit evokes its contract, each time it makes an attack that destroys an enemy model, roll a d6. On a 5+, you regain 1 loss wound after all these attacks have been resolved, up to a maximum of 6 wounds. So you got to basically kill things in order to regenerate yourself. In order to regenerate those 6 wounds, you would need to kill like 18 models, and none of your units have that many attacks. So realistically, your chances are, Mauler Fiend goes in, it's probably going to kill, maybe 4 or 5 models, which means you're going to be able to roll a handful of dice. You're probably going to regenerate 1 or 2 wounds with this. So it's not super good, and the fact that it's only in the fight phase, if this was something that could be done in the shooting phase, it'd be very interesting, because your Forge Fiends can just go crazy and kill a whole ton of things. But we don't really have the volume of attacks to kill enough models for this to really kick in. So I'm only going to give this a 1 out of 3. I don't really see anybody using this, especially considering some of the other stratagems are so crazy good. I can't ever see you justifying spending 1 CP in order to get a couple of additional wounds back on something. Yeah, it's not going to happen. Speaking of crazy ones, though, Demonic Possession, 1 CP. You use it in your command phase on 1 Heretic Studies vehicle unit from your army, excluding demon units. And until the end of the battle, your unit has the demon keyword. So this is absolutely fantastic, and it's going to allow you to take something like a Predator or a Vindicator and make it a demon. And then when you do that, that unit is now able to make your contracts because it's a demon vehicle. It's able to gain access to all of these other stratagems, and there's some really crazy stuff that you can do with this that we'll go through in a moment. But safe to say for now, we're going to give this a 3 out of 3. It's a really powerful stratagem just because it synergizes so well with the rest of the detachment. I'm a real big fan of this one. Next, we have Unstoppable Rampage. So it's 1 CP. Use it in your movement phase or your charge phase. 1 Heretic Astartes vehicle from your unit that has not been selected to move or charge yet this phase. Until the end of the phase, each time your unit makes a normal move, advance, or charge move, it can move horizontally through terrain features as if they were not there. So this is fantastic. Anybody who's versed Chaos Knights before knows how powerful it can be when a carnivore just charges through walls. Well, now we can do it with our Mauler Fiends, which is really, really cool. It also synergizes with some other stuff by being able to, take a Vindicator, put your demonic possession on it. Now it's a demon vehicle, and it can deploy hidden, and then in your turn you can spend a 1 CP to move it through the wall and then shoot things. So that's really good as well. It's going to mean that it's very hard for your opponent to hide from your damage, whether it be combat or shooting. You can get a lot of mileage out of this stratagem. So this one, Unstoppable Rampage, we're giving a 3 out of 3 as well. The next we have Predatory Pursuit. This is 1 CP, it's a strategic ploy. You use it in your opponent's movement phase just after an enemy unit ends a normal move, advance, or fallback move. 1 Heretic Astartes vehicle from your army that is within 9 inches of that enemy unit and not within engagement range of 1 or more enemy units. You can make a normal move of up to 6 inches, but you must end that move as close as possible to that enemy unit. So this one was sounding fantastic until that very last clause. Being able to do reactive moves, which you would have heard me talk about in the previous installments in this series. Reactive moves are insanely powerful. They're very, very good. However, this one requires you to end as close as possible to the target, which means you can't really use this to do any of the really cool tricks that you would normally do with a reactive move. If your opponent goes to charge you on an objective, well, what are you going to do? Move closer and make the charge easier for them? If your opponent moves so that they can see you, normally you'd be like, oh, cool, I'm going to use this reactive move to hide behind a wall or something, but you can't do that because you have to end as close as possible to them. So chances are you're going to end up, on them. I guess the case uses for this is like if your opponent moves near to an objective marker but not on it, you could use this to reactively move onto the objective. But chances are if your opponent's going near an objective, they're probably going to go onto the objective themselves, and anything that you use this on is relatively low OC, so you're not going to be able to contest or take the objective from them. So there's lots of areas where this is just falls short of what we would have liked. I would have liked to have seen this been maybe more of a blood search move where it's a random number, but you can use it to end within engagement range of your opponent. And that way, there's a reason you want to go closer to them because you're going to end as close as possible, i.e. in engagement range. That doesn't work on this, however, because it does stipulate that it's a normal move, and a normal move can never end within engagement range of enemy units. So I think this one had so much potential, but there's a few, there's basically one line that completely ruins this stratagem and makes it a 1 out of 3 for me. I can very rarely imagine you using this. And then the last one is Feeding Frenzy. This is 1 CP. In your opponent's movement phase, when an enemy unit, excluding monsters and vehicles, is selected to fall back, 1 Heretic Astartes demon vehicle unit from your army that is not within that is within engagement range of that enemy unit. Until the end of the phase, each time an enemy unit, excluding monsters and vehicles, that is within engagement range of your unit falls back, all models in that unit must take a desperate escape test, and when doing so, if that unit is also battle shocked, subtract 1 from those tests. So basically, if your unit falls back, they have to do it as if they were wrapped around, or if they were battle shocked. So that's pretty good. There's some situations where this is fantastic. Like if you charge a vehicle, you get it down to a couple of wounds left, and you're like, oh no, in its turn, it's going to fall back, and maybe they have the ability to fall back and shoot or something like that. So they're going to fall back, they're going to shoot me, and they're going to kill me, and it's going to be a disaster. Being able to spend 1 CP to go, cool, well now they have to take a battle shock test because they're almost dead. If they fail that test, they're then going to fall back. They have to take a desperate escape test and have -1 to the result. There's a decent chance that when they go to fall back, they're actually just going to die. So that's really, really powerful. That being said, it's not something that I think people are going to use often because this army pivots around vehicles, like your demon vehicles, and chances are your opponent's just going to shoot into the combat because if they have a vehicle in combat with your vehicle, they're just going to shoot your vehicle. Because of the big guns never tire, they're able to target you. So I don't think it's that good. There are definitely some cases though where this is really cool. If you have a Mauler Fiend that's in combat with something and they know that in your turn you're going in their turn you're going to kill them because you've charged in, you've done half the damage of their Land Raider, and they know that they don't have the firepower to kill you, which means in their turn you're going to be able to fight them and they're going to kill you. They're going to want to fall back. And in doing so, you've got this stratagem that can disincentivize them. And sometimes just telling them that you have this stratagem will mean that they just won't fall back. Because they know that if they fall back, you're going to use this stratagem and then they're going to have a 1 in 3 chance of just dying. They're probably not going to bother. They're probably just going to go, cool, I'll just stay in combat then. So I don't think this stratagem is going to be used very often. But the fact that it exists is a really powerful tool in your kit. So you need to make sure you understand the stratagem and that you communicate it with your opponent, and then them knowing that you have the capacity to do this means that it's going to change the way they play the game, and for that alone, I'm going to give this a 2 out of 3, as I think it's really interesting. So that's the enhancements, the stratagems, and the army rule. So let's talk about the top combos. So the first one I call the Kool-Aid, and this one we've already sort of covered it, but basically you're going to be able to use the Demonic Possession to make things like a Vindicator or a Predator into a Demon Engine, and then you're going to be able to use the stratagem to move through walls to be able to jump out. I think this is really, really powerful, and it's going to allow you to put those Vindicators in positions that normally you wouldn't be able to. Normally you need to position your Vindicator so that with its normal movement it can get around the ruins that it's hiding behind and able to draw lines on your opponent, and sometimes that can be really difficult because of the way you've got to go around the wall. It's going to limit your ability to shoot them. Whereas now, with this, you're going to be able to put that Vindicator right in the corner of that ruin and then just charge and then just jump out straight through the wall. So I think that's really, really interesting, and it's particularly powerful on something like a Vindicator that's, not super long range, but it's a DACA thing and it's got somewhat limited movement. I think that's really cool. So we call that the Kool-Aid. The next one is the Demonic Predator. You basically take a Predator Destructor, you use the Dark Pacts, the Demonic Possession, etc. Then you can get from Vashtor, you can get +1 strength, you can get +1 to wound from your detachment ability, and then you can get +1 AP from the stratagem, and that's going to allow you to put out some ridiculous damage on a Predator. So the Predators in the Soulforged Warpack are not the same as Predators in everything else. They put out so much more damage, and I just think the Demonic Predator is going to be a staple in Soulforged Warpack style lists. So that's another one that's a really interesting combo. The next I call Vashed Crawlers, which is basically just pairing Venom Crawlers with the aura of Tempting Addendum to get you reroll hits, and then +1 strength and +1 to wound is also crazy good on Venom Crawlers. And the idea here is that Venom Crawlers benefit more from these abilities than other units because they're relatively low strength, they're relatively low AP. That means that when they do get the +1 strength, that increases them by a larger margin. And then when they get +1 to wound, that's more useful on them, because going from wounding on, say, 4s to wounding on 3s is better than going from wounding on 3s to wounding on 2s. It's, as a percentage increase, you're going to get a lot more bang for your buck on these units. Same as going from AP1 to AP2 is significantly better than going from, say, AP3 to AP4, because you're going to be able to push your opponent's saves a little bit further. You're going to be, because often when you're at AP3, you're probably pushing them to their invulnerable saves anyway, so it's not super relevant, whereas the Venom Crawlers in the Vashtor list actually are able to get that additional AP, which is really, really interesting. So I think a lot of these lists are going to pivot around Venom Crawlers, and they're going to do a lot of really good work. So with all of that being considered, I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10 for discretionary points, which is very high, and I'm going to give the detachment itself a 35 out of 50. Very, very powerful detachment. So let's have a look at a list, because we've got a Soulforged Warpack list here. And starts off with Vashtor. He's relatively expensive and he doesn't do a lot of damage himself, but I think the aura that he provides is absolutely critical for this army. Then we have the Warpsmith with the Tempting Addendum. These two guys are going to run around together, they're buddies, and they're basically there to provide auras. And then also, if your opponent gets too close, Vashtor can jump out and do pretty heavy damage himself. We've got your obligatory unit of cultists. They're there for sticking your home objective and, being a general screen in your backfield, that sort of thing. We've got a unit of bikers here. I think bikers in this detachment, they don't really gain too much from the detachment itself, but they're a fast unit. They're going to be able to go out and do your actions while your demon engines and your tanks go ahead and do the damage. So they're a good action monkey. And they also bring, a couple of melter guns with them, so they've got some relevant damage as well. They're relatively tough. I just think they're a fantastic value unit. Then we rounded out with a Predator Destructor, which has got your las cannons and your auto cannons and all that sort of stuff, and he's your demonic predator like we were talking about earlier. We've got a Vindicator in there. He's going to be able to use that Kool-Aid style ability to charge through, to jump out through walls and blast things. We've got 3 Forge Fiends. Now, I've got them all here as having the Ectoplasma cannons on all 3 of their weapons. However, in this detachment, there is an argument that you could potentially make for bringing the Hades autocannons, because they benefit a little bit more from the detachment abilities. That being said, I just think those Ectoplasma cannons are such a good all-purpose attacker that I think it's worth just taking all 3 of them, and I would. And that's also mine are modeled that way. However, if you were getting into it now and you were buying a second or a third Forge Fiend, there's definitely an argument to be made to diversify and have one of them with the autocannons and the other 2 with the Ectoplasma, or 2 with autocannons and 1 with Ectoplasma. There's definitely some justifications there. But yeah, if it were me, I would be running him with just all Ectoplasma. Then we've got 3 Mauler Fiends here, all with the Lasher Tendrils. I think the Lasher Tendrils just outperform the Melter, whatever it's called, Magma Cutters. But either way, I don't think there's a particularly huge difference there. So if you prefer one look than the other look, then by all means go for that. And then we round the list out with 3 Venom Crawlers. So it's a pretty straightforward list. You've got 3 Venom Crawlers, you've got 3 Mauler Fiends, you've got 3 Forge Fiends, you've got Vashdor, you've got a Predator, you've got a Vindicator. So you've got so much damage. And then the idea with this army is that you're going to play it to table your opponent. You're going to go in and you're just going to go do so much damage to them that your opponent just spazzes out, and they're going to really struggle to score secondaries. They're going to really struggle to score their primary, because the second they hop out onto an objective, you're just blasting them. And if they're trying to hide behind walls, your Mauler Fiends are able to run through the wall and charge them. If they're trying to hide out of line of sight of your Vindicator, it's able to jump out through the walls and do things as well. And anything that does present itself to direct line of sight is going to get absolutely rinsed by your Forge Fiends. So there's some serious damage in this list. It'll play similar to a Chaos Knight list as well, where the durability of this list is coming from the fact that it's all vehicles. There's just so many vehicles in this list. Every bolt gun that your opponent has is a complete waste of time. Every small arms that they have, they're not even going to bother shooting them, which means that they're not getting any value out of that part of their data sheets. The only value that they're going to get is from their heavy weapons, or if they have something that has access to reroll wounds or something like that. But generally speaking, the idea here is you're just going to threat saturate, you're going to overwhelm them, and if they don't have the capacity to kill, what is this, 9, 10, 11, so 12 big monsters, because Vashdor is pretty tough himself, so essentially you got 12 big monsters. If they don't have the capacity to kill all of that, then they're going to really struggle to get through your army. There are some weaknesses, it's got relatively low OC, this army, so if your opponent's able to play it smart, they're able to hide everything, and they're able to throw out small units to deny you objectives, that's going to be painful. So with that being said, I think this army needs to be played hyper-aggressively. You can't just let your opponent dictate the terms like that. You're going to have to play it aggressive. So let's pull up a deployment map now, and we'll talk through how to deploy this army and some of the things that you're going to want to do. Alrighty, so let's have a look at this now. It's worth noting with this army that it's going to have an absolutely huge footprint. Like if you look at it here, if you've got one of these is about the size of a Venom Crawler, one of these is about the size of a Mauler Fiend, and then wherever the Rhino is, this guy here, is about the size of a Rhino, Vindicator, or your Vindicator or your Predator, right? And you can already see there, we've just got the 3 of them, and it fills a decent chunk of your deployment zone, and you're going to be trying to fit 12. So one of the things you're going to want to start doing in this is putting some stuff in strategic reserves. Particularly, you're going to want at least 1 Forge Fiend, and then the idea here is that with your Forge Fiend, he's going to be able to, in the second battle round, he's going to be able to come on somewhere like here, where he has a good draw of line of sight into a lot of the board, or somewhere down here, where he has the similar, ability to draw line of sight. So bringing on a Forge Fiend, maybe 1 or 2, is a really effective way of sort of shoring up your shooting and also freeing up space in your deployment zone. You might also consider bringing on a Mauler Fiend as well for a similar purpose. He doesn't need to draw the line of sight, but being able to bring one on where your opponent isn't able to predict where you're going to come from is really, really good. So I would start with probably 2 Forge Fiends and a Mauler Fiend, all in strategic reserves. There's an argument to be made that the Vindicator could as well, but what we're going to do with the Vindicator is we're probably going to be putting him in a deployment zone like this. He's going to go right where that Venom Crawler is. So let's get him out of the way first. That Vindicator is probably going to go something like this, right? Because if he's there, your opponent is not going to be able to shoot you because you're out of line of sight, because there's a wall here, assuming that that wall covers all of that space. And then basically in your command phase, you're going to be able to make him a demon. And then in your turn, you're going to be able to, depending on your command points, of course, like if your opponent goes first, you're going to generate a command point at the start of the game. And then in your turn, you're going to generate another one, and you're going to have 2 CP. You're going to be able to use one of them to make him a demon, and another one to be able to make him move through walls. And then he's going to be able to, in first turn, move to here. Which means in the first turn, you're going to have line of sight of so much of that no man's land. And this is where that Kool-Aid style move is really powerful, because if he was deployed back here, as he would normally be, if he couldn't move through walls, he's going to be able to move right to here somewhere, basically, and he's going to be able to draw line of sight to sort of the center of the board here, right? He's not going to be able to draw line of sight back here. He's not going to be able to draw line of sight down here. So it really limits his shooting potential. Whereas being able to just go, cool, he's going to deploy right here, right up close, and then in my first turn, I'm just going to jump out into the middle and just blast things down here, blast things over here. No matter where your opponent is, you're going to be able to hit them hard. So that's a really good deployment spot there for your Vindicator. And then your Predator is probably going to want to deploy somewhere like, here, so that he's hidden behind this thing, so your opponent can't shoot him. You probably angle him slightly differently, but he's going to be deployed here somewhere. And that way, in the first turn, you can either move down to here and get line of sight down onto this stuff, or over to here and get line of sight into this stuff. So you can give yourself options with your 2 vehicles. And then your Venom Crawlers, they're the ones that are going to be coming out and doing the... sorry, where's the Venom Crawler there? This guy. They're going to be the ones that are going to be coming out and contesting and fighting your opponent for objectives. So you're probably going to want to deploy 2 of them down here, where again, they're going to be out of line of sight. Your opponent's not going to be able to do any effective damage to them turn 1. And then they're going to be able to move on to and charge anything that's on any objectives down here. And then you're probably going to want to put one of them up here somewhere so that they can move and head towards this objective as well, along with some Mauler Fiends in similar positions. And then one of the things you're going to want to do with your other Forge Fiend is he's going to want to basically follow the Predator and the Vindicator around and be relatively close to Vashtor and your Warpsmith. So Vashtor and the Warpsmith in this situation will probably deploy roughly where this red dot is here. And that way, with your Vindicator, which is deployed in here, and you're probably going to have... You got 2 Mauler Fiends in Deep Strike. You got... two Forge Fiends in Deep Strike, 1 Mauler Fiend. So you're going to have 1 Forge Fiend on the board, 1 Predator on the board, and 1 Vindicator. So your Vindicator in here, and your Predator here, right? And that means Vashtor and the Warpsmith here, and that with their aura, they will be able to, in the first turn, move to somewhere like... Oops, sorry, wrong thing. Venom Crawler. They're going to be able to move to somewhere like this in their first turn. And then your Forge Fiend can move up here, and he can get their rerolls there. And then your Vindicator is going to be able to charge through the wall there, or jump through the wall there. He's going to get their aura as well. And you're going to want to have a castle of tough, hard-hitting, high-damage units, all sort of centered around that guy. Another really good one to have in this general sort of area is your Mauler Fiend, because he's going to be able to, heroically intervene or do things like that and get the reroll hits from Vashtor himself. And it also means that in subsequent turns, you might do something like this in your first turn. Then in subsequent turns, this Vindicator now moves over this way so that he can draw line of sight down there. And then you might have, Vashtor and the Warpsmith move into the center there. And then you might have, assuming this was your Forge Fiend, so he probably goes over to here somewhere. So your Forge Fiend probably moves in something like this, so that he's getting the benefits from this guy as well. And then if you had a Mauler Fiend in here, he could now use the stratagem to charge through the walls, or move through a wall, and he could move out to here and charge something over there. And his base is big enough that you'll be able to, hopefully, if you position it right, you'll be able to keep him within the 3 inches of Vashtor and the Warpsmith, whilst being in engagement range of whatever your opponent has thrown out into the middle. So you're basically going to want to use the Mauler Fiends and the Venom Crawlers to deal with your opponent's units that are on objectives, whilst your Vindicators and your Forge Fiends and your Predator deal with your opponents that are not on those central objectives. They're going to be able to threaten things that are afar whilst your combat deals with the things in the middle. And that's generally the vibe on how I see this unit being used. Meanwhile, you've got a unit of 10 cultists chilling back here, and hopefully your opponent is so busy dealing with all of the mech that you've thrown along the middle here that they're going to really struggle. And if they do send something to go for these guys, you've probably got a Mauler Fiend that's in strategic reserve, so he can come on here and respond, or you've got your Vindicator, or you've got your other Forge Fiends that can come on and deal with that sort of stuff. So if your opponent goes there, you can respond, and if your opponent doesn't go there, you can bring these elements on in a more, advantageous position. You might be able to come on here and shoot down into their home, depending on where they position their units, of course, and this is obviously 100% depends on what your opponent's army looks like. But generally speaking, that's the key components of how I would advise generally applying this, is to have your Vindicator up front and center, out of line of sight, ready to jump through a wall and blast things. Your Mauler Fiends, etc., circled around your Vashtor and Warpsmith, and then you basically just want to send everything out onto those objectives and dare your opponent to kill 12 tanks and see what they can do. Yeah, that's more or less the way that I envisioned this list playing. Alrighty guys, I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, all of that good shit, and head over to blogforthebloodgod.com where you can get really cool merchandise like the t-shirt I'm wearing now. We've got neoprene objective markers and gaming mats, we've got dice, we've got all kinds of cool terrain on there. There's tons of really cool stuff. And you can also join our Discord community where we have conversations about lists, about upcoming events. We talk tactics and strategy in there. We also have tons of really fun banter and just talking shit. It's a really cool little community, and I have varying levels depending on what sort of coaching you're after. If you're after a more one-on-one intimate experience, we can do that. Or if you're after more just of a social thing, we can do that as well. So head over to our Patreon for more information about how you can join our Discord community, and I look forward to seeing you there.
Walk for the Blood God.